I never thought I would be at odds with my own family. But that's exactly where I found myself after my father's will was read. The room was filled with a quiet tension, the kind that only comes when secrets are revealed and expectations are shattered. My sister Emily was always the golden child, always the one who got the attention, the affection, the perks. And when my father passed, I thought things would change. But they didn't. He had created a trust fund for her, one that would guarantee her every luxury for the rest of her life. I was left with nothing but my own determination. Nothing but the responsibility of carrying on his legacy, as though he'd never even noticed my sacrifices. I had worked hard, sacrificed my own dreams to support this family. But the money he set aside for her made it clear I was invisible. As I stood there, I realized that my father's wealth and my sister's entitlement had been my burden all along. But it wasn't just about money. It was about the emotional toll, the years of feeling like I didn't matter. I was never seen as enough, never given the same opportunities. It was always about her, her needs, her future. As much as I loved my family, there was a part of me that felt like I was fading into the background. Every year I saw Emily get everything she wanted, whether it was the best clothes, the nicest car, or the most extravagant vacations. I had none of that. No matter how much I worked, no matter how much I sacrificed, it was never enough. I wasn't the one who mattered in the grand scheme of things. I was the one who held everything together, but no one ever saw that. No one ever saw the hours I spent working in the background, cleaning up the messes left by my sister's tantrums, or the way I quietly covered for her when she made mistakes. It felt like my whole life had been lived for the benefit of others, and all the while I was being pushed further and further into the shadows. And that's when I realized I was done. Done with living in the shadow of my sister's entitlement. Done with being invisible in the eyes of my family. Done with always putting others first while my own dreams were left to die. I had to take control. I had to finally stand up for myself. That's when I decided to stop paying the bills for the family's vacation home. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. I knew the moment I stopped paying for it, the house would no longer be a safe haven for Emily. She would have to deal with the consequences of her actions for once. And I would finally be free of the constant pressure to take care of everything. When I told my mother I was no longer paying for it, her face fell. She didn't understand. She never did. But it was always the same with her, wasn't it? She saw everything through the lens of Emily's needs. My mother couldn't see that I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of my own responsibilities. She couldn't see that I had been carrying the family for years while my sister played in the background, receiving all the praise. But I was done. I wasn't going to be the one to carry the burden anymore. For the first time in my life, I was going to put myself first. It was time to stop living for others. Time to stop making sacrifices that only benefited them. Time to stop watching as my sister took everything I had worked for and claimed it as her own. I was no longer going to be the silent one, the one who smiled and said everything was fine while the weight of the world rested on my shoulders. I was done being the family's doormat. Well, she was about to learn what it meant to live without everything handed to her. She had always relied on our father's money, on the privilege he had bestowed upon her. But I wasn't going to let her use me anymore. Not when I had my own life to live. And if she couldn't handle the consequences of her actions, then that was her problem. I had spent my entire life taking care of everyone else. Now it was my turn to take care of me. And that meant making tough choices. It meant setting boundaries. It meant saying no to the things that didn't serve me, no matter how much it hurt to disappoint the people I loved. I had spent so long trying to please everyone else that I had forgotten what it meant to be happy with myself. But that was about to change. I was going to take back my life. And if my family couldn't accept that, then I would have to learn to live without them. Because at the end of the day, I had one life to live. And I was done letting others dictate how I lived it. The days following my decision to stop paying for the vacation home were filled with tension. Emily didn't take it well, of course. She was used to getting everything she wanted without question. When I told her, she didn't even try to understand. Instead, she immediately launched into a tirade, demanding that I continue covering the bills. Her words were harsh, her tone accusatory. "You can't just stop paying, that house is ours," she said, as if the home had been hers to begin with. But it wasn't hers. It had always been my father's, and now it felt like it had become a symbol of everything I had been denied. I had given so much for that house, keeping it afloat for all those years. To see her enjoy it while I was left with the scraps of my own life. It didn't seem fair, and in that moment I realized that fairness didn't even matter anymore. What mattered was standing up for myself. What mattered was not letting anyone walk all over me, not anymore. I wasn't her servant, I wasn't anyone's caretaker. I was a person with my own needs, my own desires. And for the first time in years, I was going to live for myself. But the fallout wasn't as simple as I had imagined. Emily's anger was palpable. She went straight to our mother, of course. Mom was always the peacemaker, the one who tried to keep everyone happy, even when she knew things weren't right. She tried to reason with me, but I could tell that deep down she didn't understand. She never had, not really. She had always been too focused on keeping the peace, too afraid of conflict to see the underlying issues. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of her, of Emily, or of the guilt that used to weigh me down. When Mom called to ask why I had stopped paying, her voice shook with concern. "Why would you do this to your sister?" she asked, almost pleading. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let her words hang in the air. She didn't understand, and maybe she never would. But that was okay. It was time to let go of trying to explain myself to people who would never see things from my perspective. For years, I had made excuses for them. I had justified their actions, tried to smooth things over, and kept the peace. But it had never been enough. I had been invisible, just a shadow in the background of their lives. Now I was standing in the light, and it felt terrifying but freeing at the same time. It wasn't about the house anymore. It wasn't even about Emily. It was about my own growth, my own future. And that was something I had to take control of. The problem with family is that they always think they can dictate your life. They think they can control you with guilt, with love, with a sense of duty that you didn't ask for. But I was done with that. I was done being the dutiful daughter who bent over backward to make everyone happy. It was time for me to stop putting them first. It was time for me to stop being the one who always fixed things, who always cleaned up the messes, who always kept the peace. I wasn't responsible for them anymore. I wasn't responsible for anyone but myself. And that realization was a weight lifted off my shoulders. Still, the tension didn't subside. Emily began to escalate the situation. She called me selfish, irresponsible, and even cruel. I couldn't help but laugh at her accusations. Because I had finally stopped enabling her. Because I had refused to continue allowing her to rely on me for everything. It was laughable. But the truth is, I didn't care anymore. Her words, her anger, none of it mattered. I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into continuing a cycle that had been toxic for years. It wasn't about the money, it never had been. It was about control, and I had let them control me for too long. I had allowed myself to become the scapegoat, the one who bore the weight of all their demands. But no more. No more would I allow my life to be dictated by their needs and expectations. Emily's reaction was predictable, but it still hurt. She was angry, frustrated, and helpless, and she directed all of that toward me. She didn't want to take responsibility for herself. She wanted me to do it for her, just like I always had. But this time I refused. And as the days passed, I realized something important. I wasn't the one causing the rift in the family, she was. She was the one who had taken everything I had given and expected more. She was the one who had never learned to stand on her own. And it wasn't my job to teach her anymore. It wasn't my job to fix things. I had spent so many years feeling guilty, feeling like I owed them something. But the truth was, I didn't owe them a thing. And when I finally realized that, everything shifted. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to be the good daughter who never rocked the boats. For the first time, I was going to be the person I needed to be. And that meant making hard decisions. It meant walking away from the expectations they had placed on me. It meant stepping into my own life, no matter how uncomfortable it was. Because I couldn't keep living for them. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness for the sake of their comfort. And if that meant losing their approval, then so be it. I was ready to stand on my own, ready to build a future where I didn't feel invisible. And no matter how much Emily or my mother tried to make me feel guilty, I wasn't going to go back. I wasn't going to be the person who had always been there for everyone else while sacrificing my own needs. Not anymore. As the weeks went by, things between my family and I only grew more strained. Emily's anger simmered beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the decision I had made. She no longer spoke to me the way she once did, her once warm, familiar voice now cold and filled with disdain. I could feel the distance growing between us, an invisible wall that I had built with my own hands. But this time I didn't care. I had finally stopped catering to her whims, and while it hurt to see her so upset, I knew it was for the best. I was tired of being the person everyone leaned on, the one who always picked up the pieces when things fell apart. It was time for her to figure things out on her own, just as I had done for years. But my mother, ever the peacemaker, couldn't stand the tension. She kept calling me, asking if I could just talk to Emily. She didn't understand why I couldn't simply fix things like I always had. But I wasn't going to fix this. I wasn't going to be the one to smooth over the cracks that had formed over the years. I wasn't going to keep enabling the same behaviors, the same sense of entitlement that had been ingrained in my sister for as long as I could remember. The more my mother begged, the more resolute I became. She didn't get it, and honestly, I wasn't sure if she ever would. But that didn't matter anymore. I had to look after myself now, and I had to stop letting my family control my decisions. Every time my mother called, I could feel the guilt creeping in, but I would push it away. I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into doing something I didn't want to do. I wasn't going to keep paying for the house, wasn't going to keep enabling Emily's behavior. She was old enough to understand the consequences of her actions. But still, the phone calls came. The texts from my mother became more frequent, more pleading. "Please just talk to her," she would say. I could feel her pain, her need for harmony, but I had to be firm. I had to be strong, even though every part of me wanted to give in and return to my role as the family fixer. But I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness just to make them happy. I wasn't their servant, I wasn't their caretaker. I was a person with my own needs, my own desires, and for the first time I was going to put those first. It was hard, but I knew it was the right thing to do. For once, I was going to live for myself. But Emily wasn't ready to let go. She didn't understand why I had made the decision I did, and that made her even more furious. She was used to getting everything handed to her, used to being the center of attention. And now, for the first time, she was. She couldn't understand why I would make her face the consequences of her actions, why I wouldn't just keep everything the way it was. Her frustration boiled over, and she began to escalate the situation. She started telling anyone who would listen that I was selfish, that I was destroying the family. She painted me as the villain in this story, the one who had torn apart everything we had. But I knew the truth. I knew that I was doing the right thing, even if no one else saw it that way. I was standing up for myself, standing up for my own needs, and for once I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else make me feel guilty for doing what was best for me. But the fallout wasn't over. One evening, my mother came to my house, her eyes red from crying. She sat down across from me, a look of desperation in her eyes. "Please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Please just talk to her, she's falling apart, this is tearing us all apart." It was hard to see her like this, to see the pain in her eyes, but I knew that I couldn't give in. I had already made my decision, and I wasn't going to go back on it. "Mom," I said softly, "I know this is hard, but I can't keep doing this. I can't keep taking care of everything for everyone else." She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. And in that moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But I knew I had to stay strong. If I gave in now, I would just be going back to the same old routine. I would be putting everyone else's needs above my own, just like I always had. But I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't keep living a life that wasn't mine. I had to take control. I had to start putting myself first. And as much as it hurt to see my mother in pain, I knew that this was the right thing to do. I had to stop living for everyone else. I had to stop being the one who always fixed things, always made sure everything was okay. I had to learn to say no, to let go of the weight I had been carrying for so long. And so I did. I didn't give in to the guilt, didn't let my mother's tears sway me. For the first time in my life, I stood firm in my decision, and it felt empowering. I wasn't going to let anyone dictate my life anymore. Not Emily, not my mother, not anyone's. I was going to live my life on my terms, and no one was going to make me feel guilty for doing so. The phone calls from Emily didn't stop, but they grew less frequent. She began to realize that I wasn't going to give in. And slowly, she started to pull away. But I wasn't sad about it. I wasn't angry. I was relieved. For the first time, I was free of the weight I had been carrying for so long. And while the family dynamic had shifted, while things weren't the same between us, I knew deep down that I was doing what was best for me. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And that was the first step in reclaiming my life. As time went on, I found myself settling into a rhythm that was completely unfamiliar. For the first time in years, I wasn't consumed by the demands of my family. I wasn't running around trying to put out fires or keeping things together for people who had never asked if I needed help. It felt strange, but also incredibly liberating. The first few days were the hardest. I kept thinking about how my family was reacting to my decision. I wondered if they thought I was heartless, if they saw me as someone who didn't care. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to realize something important. I was doing this for me. I was doing this because I had spent so much of my life putting others first that I had forgotten what it felt like to prioritize myself. And the more I focused on my own needs, the more I felt like I was finally breathing. I took a deep breath every time I woke up, feeling lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. I wasn't living for anyone else's approval anymore, and that was a relief I had never known. I started working on my own projects, the ones I had put off for so long because I was too busy managing other people's problems. I started spending time doing things I loved, things that made me happy, things that gave me purpose. I enrolled in a photography class, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I had a camera in my hand every weekend, exploring new places, capturing moments that made me feel alive. The freedom to explore my passions felt like a revelation. And with that freedom came a deep sense of satisfaction. It was incredible how much time and energy I had gained just by choosing to let go of the burdens I had carried for so long. But that didn't mean things were perfect. There were still days when I felt the weight of my family's judgment. I would receive messages from my mother asking how I was doing, trying to keep the door open for reconciliation. She would tell me that Emily was heartbroken, that she couldn't believe I had done this. I could hear the hurt in her voice every time she called, but it didn't move me. I wasn't going to apologize for taking care of myself. I wasn't going to apologize for finally setting boundaries. It was hard, but I knew it was the right thing to do. And as much as I cared about my mother's feelings, I had to stay strong in my resolve. I had to keep moving forward. For years, I had been the one to shoulder the weight of my family's expectations, to hold everything together while my sister and mother went about their lives. But now I was free. I was free from the constant pressure, the unspoken demands, the feeling that I had to always be the one to fix things. And while it wasn't easy, it was worth it. The relief I felt from not having to manage my sister's behavior, not having to smooth over every argument, not having to constantly put myself last was overwhelming. For the first time in my life, I was truly living for myself. I wasn't living to meet anyone else's expectations, and I wasn't living in fear of disappointing anyone. I was simply living. And that was more than enough. But even with all of the positive changes, there were still moments when I second-guessed myself. There were times when I missed the family dynamic we once had, when I missed the sense of closeness we used to share. I wondered if I had made the right decisions. I wondered if my family would ever understand why I had to do what I did. But as the months went by, I realized something else. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need them to understand. I was doing this for my own well-being, and that was enough. And as I began to embrace that truth, I started to see the changes in myself. I was stronger now, more confident, more secure in who I was. I had become a person who no longer let others define her. I wasn't the fixer anymore, the one who always put everyone's needs above her own. I had learned to say no, to set boundaries, and to protect my peace. And as I continued to grow, I realized that I didn't need my family to complete me. I didn't need them to validate my worth. I had already done that for myself. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Pride in the person I was becoming, pride in the decisions I had made, and pride in the strength I had shown. I had reclaimed my life, and it was more than I could have ever hoped for. But Emily wasn't ready to let go of the past. She still sent me angry messages, telling me how disappointed she was in me. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to respond. I didn't feel the need to defend myself, to explain why I had made the decision I did. Because I didn't owe her or anyone else an explanation. I had made my choice and I was sticking with it. And as much as it hurt to see my sister so upset, I knew that she had to face the consequences of her own actions. She had always relied on me to fix things, to clean up the messes she made. But now she was on her own. And as much as I wished things could be different, I knew that this was the only way for me to move forward. I couldn't go back to the way things were, and I didn't want to. I had finally broken free from the chains of my family's expectations, and I wasn't going to let anyone pull me back in. The more time passed, the more I realized that I was better off without constantly carrying the weight of their demands. And slowly, I started to rebuild the relationship with myself that had been buried under years of sacrifice and self-doubt. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that was the most important thing of all. As I looked ahead, I realized that I had finally started living my life on my own terms. I was no longer defined by my family's needs, by my sister's expectations, or by the role I had been forced to play. I was free. And that freedom was worth every sacrifice. As the weeks stretched into months, I began to notice subtle changes in myself. I had already started to build a life outside of the shadows of my family, but now I was beginning to understand what true independence felt like. It wasn't just about making decisions for myself or taking control of my future. It was about rediscovering who I was without the constant pressure to please others. I started to reclaim the dreams I had buried for so long, dreams that I had dismissed as impossible when I was busy carrying the weight of my family's expectations. For the first time, I felt free to do what I wanted. I wasn't confined by the role of the family fixer anymore. I wasn't bound by the duty to always put others first, to sacrifice my own happiness for theirs. I was learning to put myself first, and that was more difficult than I had ever imagined. I had spent so many years living for others that I didn't even know how to live for myself. But slowly I began to learn. I started saying yes to the things I had always wanted to do, even if they seemed small or insignificant. I started taking weekends off, spending time with friends who made me laugh, and exploring places I had always dreamed of visiting. I went to a weekend writing retreat that I had seen advertised months ago, telling myself it was an indulgence I couldn't afford. But now I didn't care. It was something I wanted to do, and for once I was going to do it without guilt. It was one of the most rewarding experiences I had ever had. I realized that I had been missing out on so much because I had been too focused on other people's needs. The retreat gave me space to reconnect with my creative side, something I had pushed to the side for far too long. I hadn't written anything outside of work for years, but during that retreat I wrote 3 short stories, each one more personal than the last. The satisfaction I felt when I completed them was something I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was a feeling of accomplishment, of finally doing something for myself, not because anyone else asked me to, but because I wanted to. I realized that I had been ignoring my own happiness for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to truly live. And even though the rest of my family was still struggling with the fallout of my decision, I was finally finding peace. But peace didn't mean the absence of struggle. There were days when I still felt the weight of their disapproval, when I wondered if I had done the right thing. Emily still didn't speak to me unless it was absolutely necessary, and even then her words were cold and laced with resentment. I could tell that she was still angry with me, still frustrated that I had chosen to take a stand. But the more I reflected on the situation, the more I realized that my decision had been the right one for both of us. I had never asked to carry the burden of my family's expectations, and Emily had never asked to be the one who could do no wrong. It wasn't fair to either of us to continue living in a cycle where I was the one who always had to fix things. I couldn't carry the weight of the world on my shoulders anymore. And Emily had to learn how to stand on her own, just as I had to learn. But despite the quiet animosity between us, there was one thing that had changed. I was no longer afraid. I wasn't afraid to be myself anymore, even if that meant disappointing my family. I wasn't afraid of losing them. If anything, I had come to realize that their approval wasn't what I needed to feel complete. I was complete on my own. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my own identity, one that wasn't shaped by their needs or expectations. It was a strange feeling to be both free and unsure of where to go next. But that uncertainty didn't feel as daunting anymore. It felt like an opportunity to build something new, something that was truly mine. I had learned to trust myself again, to believe that I could make decisions without second-guessing every move. For years, I had felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to avoid making waves in a family that seemed incapable of seeing my needs. But now I had broken free from that cycle. And while it wasn't always easy, it was worth it. It was worth the discomfort of setting boundaries, worth the distance that had grown between me and my family, because in the end, it meant I was living for myself. But just as I started to truly embrace this new chapter of my life, Emily came to me with a proposal I never saw coming. One evening she called, her voice soft and almost tentative. Her tone was different this time, not filled with anger but with something else, something that almost sounded like vulnerability. I didn't know what to expect, but I agreed to meet her. We met at a small cafe, one of the few places in town that we used to go to when we were younger. She arrived first, sitting at a corner table, her eyes downcast as she fiddled with the sugar packet. When I sat down across from her, she didn't look up right away. But after a few moments of silence, she finally met my gaze. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice quiet. The words felt strange coming from her, as if she had never truly said them before. "I don't know what I was thinking. I was angry and hurt, and I took it out on you. I didn't know what to say at first. I had spent so many months angry at her, so many months feeling betrayed and misunderstood. But now, as I looked at her, I saw something different. I saw someone who had been lost, someone who was trying to find her way just like I had. "I'm sorry too," I said, my voice softer than I expected. For the first time, I felt like we were on the same level, like we were both just people trying to figure things out. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe things weren't perfect, but they didn't have to be. I didn't need my family's approval to be happy. I just needed to be true to myself. And with that, I realized that I had already come so far. The peace I had been searching for wasn't found in the approval of others, but in my own acceptance of who I had become. I had learned to live for myself, to put myself first, and that was something no one could take away from me. And no matter what happened with Emily, with my mother, or anyone else, I knew one thing for sure: I was finally free. And that was enough. It's been a few months since that day at the cafe with Emily. Things have settled, but they've settled differently than I imagined. There's still a distance between my family and me, but it's no longer a chasm of anger and resentment. It's more like the space between two people who have learned to respect each other's boundaries, even if those boundaries weren't easy to accept. I've stopped waiting for their approval, and I've stopped being afraid of disappointing them. For the first time, I'm starting to understand what it means to live authentically, to make decisions without the constant worry of how they will affect others. It's a strange feeling, almost like learning to walk again after being stuck in a cast for years. But it's liberating, and the more I let go of the need to please, the more I realize that my happiness doesn't come from anyone else. It comes from within. And as I look back on the past few months, I see how much I've grown. I've learned that true freedom comes from setting boundaries, from saying no when it's necessary, and from not letting anyone define your worth. I've stopped making excuses for the things I've done to take care of others at my own expense. I've stopped apologizing for putting myself first. The truth is, I spent so many years living for my family that I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I didn't know who I was when I wasn't playing the role of the caretaker, the peacemaker, the fixer. But now I'm starting to figure that out. I'm starting to remember who I was before all of this, before the pressure, before the sacrifices. I'm rediscovering my passions, the things that used to bring me joy before I became so focused on everyone else's needs. I'm starting to paint again. I'm reading books that make me feel alive, instead of just picking up the ones that everyone else tells me to read. I'm traveling, exploring new places, new ideas, and new experiences that make me feel like the world is full of possibility. I've realized that I don't need permission to do these things. I don't need anyone to validate my choices, my actions, my dreams. I've come to understand that the only approval I need is my own. And for the first time in years, I'm proud of the person I'm becoming. It's not perfect, but it's mine. And that's enough. But while I've found peace within myself, that doesn't mean everything is suddenly smooth sailing. There are still moments when I feel the pull of my old life, the one where I always took care of everything for everyone else. I still get messages from my mother telling me that Emily is struggling or that she misses me. I still hear the whispers of guilt in the back of my mind, telling me that I should do more, that I should be more. But I've learned to ignore those voices. I've learned to say no when I need to protect my peace, and to remember that I can't pour from an empty cup. And the truth is, I'm stronger now. I'm not the same person I was before I made that decision to step back. I'm more confident, more secure in who I am, and more determined to stay true to myself. But even with all this growth, there are still days when I struggle with the aftermath of my decision. There are moments when I feel like I've lost something that I can't quite put into words. I miss the closeness my family once had. I miss the ease of spending time together without the constant undercurrent of tension. I miss the version of my family where we all felt connected, where we were a unit, not a group of individuals scattered by hurt and misunderstanding. But even as I grieve that loss, I also know that what I've gained is worth the sacrifice. I've gained my independence. I've gained the ability to live on my own terms, to pursue my own dreams without asking for permission. I've gained the strength to stand up for myself, even when it means disappointing those I love. And that in itself is something worth celebrating. I've come to realize that there's no going back. The life I had before, where I lived in constant service to others, where I put myself last and always tried to make everyone happy, is gone. It's not coming back. And I don't want it to. I don't want to go back to being the person who was afraid to put herself first. I don't want to go back to living in the shadows, always trying to please everyone else while I lost myself in the process. I've learned that it's okay to be selfish sometimes. It's okay to say no. It's okay to put myself first because I'm worthy of that. I've learned that true love for others starts with love for yourself. And while I may never have the kind of relationship with my family that I once imagined, I'm okay with that. Because I know that I've made the right choices for me. And I can live with that. In the end, I realized that my happiness wasn't in the approval of others, it was in my own hands. I could choose to stay stuck in a cycle of guilt and obligation, or I could choose to break free and live my own life. And for once, I chose me. And that, I believe, was the best decision I could have ever made. I am enough just as I am. I am worthy of happiness, of peace, and of living my life on my own terms. And that's something no one can take from me. Not even my family. Because I have learned to love myself first, and that's where true freedom lies. And now, as I stand at the threshold of this new chapter in my life, I know one thing for sure. I'm not going to waste another minute living for anyone else. I'm going to live for me.